Welcome to Tesseract Podcast, where we unlock your power to innovate. Hi, my name is Matt, and I'm going to be your host today. Tesseract's mission is to empower airmen, connect them to resources, and accelerate change across the Air Force logistics enterprise. Specifically, our team works as an innovation accelerator assigned to the Air Staff Logistics Directorate, where we partner with airmen to operationalize the new sustainment strategy. In this episode, we talk about OCONUS MICAPs. One of our most listened to episodes on our podcast is our episode with Chip Litchfield talking about MICAP Prime. This is the next step of MICAP Prime, talking about OCONUS capabilities. This is actually a conversation we had middle of last year with Major Vince McLean, Major Garrett Hernandez, and Captain Chris Ford. We're pulling this from the archives because it's still relevant today. And we think it's going to add value to our logistics professionals across the force. All right, here we go. So thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for inviting Vince over to the podcast. Garrett, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, so this is also my very first podcast. So I'm pretty, I would say, honored, and I feel like one of the cool kids now. I get to come here to the Tesseract headquarters of podcasting.
And well, you're talking about being honored. The fact that I get to come on here and guest speak with you guys is phenomenal. You guys do such awesome work that I'm truly honored to just be here and be a part of this. So that's really awesome.
Let's talk a little bit about your experience at ASAM. Not very familiar with it. How's your time been?
Oh man, ASAM is awesome. So the Advanced Study of Air Mobility, so if you've never heard of it, it's an 11-month kind of joint program between AETC, AFIT, and AMC. So it's an intermediate developmental education program, sort of like ACSC. So it checks that in-residence IDE program box, but at the same time, it confers a master's degree in organizational management. So, not only do I get to, do that in-residence piece, but I also get another master's degree too, which is, awesome. So this program, it focuses on supply chain management, logistics, global mobility, and it brings together, half of my, 16-person class is pilots, and the other half is logistics, it's maintenance, we've got a comm guy, and then it brings us all together to, get hyper-focused into supply chain management and logistics. And each of us bring our own kind of perspectives and experiences to the table. And we get to share that while going through this AFIT program to, get another master's degree. So if you get selected for IDE and you get this opportunity, I cannot think of a better program. It's awesome.
So should I go to ASAM or should I EWE to Amazon, Garrett?
Yeah, I think we can easily get into a competition here where everyone wins and everyone loses. I would say the right answer is you do EWE Amazon and then go straight to get an ASAM degree, which is kind of like what Vince's wife was able to do. Didn't she go from EWE straight into Leggy Fellow?
She did. Yeah. So my wife did EWE also. She was with FedEx. And so she literally did her 1 year at FedEx and then went to legislative fellowship where she served in a congressman's office for a year. So you want to talk about like the best of experiences. She's got it. That's
awesome. Hey, so at ASAM, how do you get your research topics? Is that kind of like here's a whole bunch of them, pick one, or is it, I have an idea kind of thing? How does that work?
Yeah, so you basically get to come up with whatever you want. So as part of ASAM, you're required to do this graduate research project. And this is something that you choose for yourself. It's something that you're, super passionate about because you have to be passionate about it because you're going to spend a ton of time becoming the expert in it. And so part of that requirement is to go and, find a sponsor because you want, the Air Force wants you to do something that's relevant to the Air Force. So you go out and you find yourself like a general officer sponsor and, they tell you some of the things that are eating their lunch right now. And then you get to turn around and, try to help solve their problems. And so anyway, I'm super passionate about sustainment stuff. And I've worked with General Sanford before. And so I picked him up to be my sponsor and then tried to actually work with Garrett and getting Chip Litchfield to try to come up with a relevant topic for my research that I could try to do to turn around and actually, do something that's useful for the Air Force and something that I'm still passionate about.
Right. And so just to back up real quick, General Sanford, he is the DLA Aviation Commander, Director, right?
Commander, yeah.
Okay.
It's got a super long title to it that I don't have in front of me right now, but yeah, you shorthand it to just basically the Commander of DLA Aviation.
Awesome. So you're at ASAM. You've kind of selected that you want General Sanford to be your sponsor, and then you want to do something in sustainment. And I think you mentioned Chip Litchfield, who is, if he's not a legend already, will become one shortly. So how did that all come together, and where did you kind of derive your topic from that?
Yeah. So so again, I'm super passionate about sustainment. And across the Air Force and across the DoD, we're running into these like massive sustainment challenges when it comes to the weapon system sustainment. And one of those effects of those challenges is that we routinely don't meet our mission capable rate goals due to lack of parts on hand and in order to perform maintenance. That's actually why that whole MC-80 program came around, is because at the time, Secretary of Defense Mattis wanted us to go out there and see if we could even get to this 80%, because we were, it's eating our lunch that we can't get these planes up and off the ground to the rate that we need them to. And this is a huge deal. Our competitors, think like Russia or China, are routinely looking at us and judging us to see if we can compete with them. And if we have a force that is so ready and so able to fight, then they won't even try to fight us. The problem is we're losing that competitive edge. So I wanted to try to do a paper that helped address these challenges. And so I wrote this paper called Accelerate, Logistics, or Lose. Obviously a play on General Brown's Accelerate, Change, or Lose. And it's a study to try to determine to what extent accelerating order fulfillment for MICAPs can generate additional flying hours. So you guys, it's going to sound pretty familiar. You guys have a Pathfinder project called MICAP Prime. And MICAP Prime and Chip were the inspiration for this project.
Awesome.
Now, if you're on this podcast and you've probably already heard of MICAP Prime, but it basically tries to answer the question of, can we speed up MICAPs in a way that resembles Amazon Prime? If you're a logistics officer, you have probably heard this question before. If Amazon can get me my stuff in 2 days, why can't the Air Force? Well, we turned around and we started to try to explore this question. Can we do it? And if so, can we get more flying hours out of it? And if we can get, if we can get more flying hours out of it, is it cost effective? So Chip Litchfield wrote this awesome paper exploring this concept as a theory. He looked at the F-16s, KC-135s, and C-5s, MICAPs going from one CONUS base to another CONUS base, and basically outlined this conceptual framework that said, if we speed up MICAPs, how much could we speed them up? And what net effect in increasing flying hours would we get back? But so when he did all the math, and if you've ever met Chip Litchfield, he's one of those dudes with a 20-pound brain.
Yeah.
So he does all this math, and he realizes, yes, if we speed up MICAP order fulfillment, we could save time and increase flying hours. But woohoo, anybody could tell you that. If you drive a little faster, you're going to get to your destination a little faster, right? The huge deal that Chip found was the price tag attached to this. This was one of the first things that people generally push back on when you talk about shipping things faster, is the potential cost of it. And so he found that you can generate hundreds of flying hours, hundreds of additional flying hours, not for millions of dollars, but rather a few $1,000s, like $1 or $2 per shipment.
Right. Even if that, I think the number he used was for a 15-pound MICAP, something in the neighborhood of 65 cents. Yeah. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
So less than $1 per shipment. And, if that's a MICAP that's going to an aircraft that needs this one part to be able to fly, then you can save days of readiness time for 65 extra cents, less than $1.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in the big scheme of DoD budgeting, even if you increase every single MICAP in the Air Force, it is nothing. It is budget dust.
Right.
So in a resource constrained environment, we have to ask ourselves, what gives us the biggest bang for our buck? Well, Chip found that speeding up MICAPs, going from one CONUS base to another CONUS base, can generate hundreds of flying hours for basically, budget dust. Okay, so that's a long thing on Chip's paper, but so Chip wrote this great paper, but it only looks at MICAPs going from one CONUS base to another CONUS base. And the obvious next step was CONUS to OCONUS MICAPs. So that's where my paper comes in. Accelerate Logistics or Lose is a study of to what extent accelerating MICAPs going from CONUS to OCONUS can generate additional flying hours. So I chose F-16s to try and kind of keep form with Chip's paper, still be operationally relevant. So Chip's paper, though, was kind of highly conceptual, but I didn't want to go on the conceptual side. I wanted to use hard data. For this study, I picked MICAPs going from from CONUS going to Aviano, Spangalum, and Massawa, utilizing the same next generation delivery service in FY20. So between Aviano, Spangalum, and Massawa, they had about 1,686 MICAPs. Of those, 742 were in GDS MICAPs, so I focused in on those.
Hey, real quick, sorry to
go ahead.
Can you give what is NGDS for those not familiar?
Yeah, so sorry, that was the next generation delivery service.
Okay.
So NGDS is a transcom contract with commercial carriers. And those commercial carriers basically take our stuff and they, ship it from our bases to, whatever destination that we ask them to.
Cool. Okay. So NGDS overseas. Yeah.
So of the 1,686 MICAPs that I looked at, 742 of those used NGDS. So I focused on those, and like I said, what I found was wild. The median average for MICAPs going from CONUS to OCONUS took about 5 days, which is, kind of great when you consider how far these things have to go. And so when we break those 5 days down into, in individual components, the Air Force processing uses about a day, and then the NGDS transportation piece takes 4 days. So next up, this paper, now that I kind of know what the Air Force does, and the Air Force is, how the Air Force, or the current status of it all. Next I compared that to industry to determine what the fastest those MICAPs could be delivered is. So first looking at that Air Force step, that 1 day that we own. And if we compare that to industry, we look at Amazon Prime. And Amazon Prime, when you order something, they are picking it off of the shelf, they are packing it, and they are putting it in the hands of a transportation carrier basically the same day. And so that's a lot of time. If you're lucky enough to live close to one of their fulfillment centers, you can get same day delivery on a lot of the stuff that you order, which is just awesome. And then the 2-day delivery that they can provide to you, a lot of that is not necessarily based on Amazon's warehouse processing, but rather the shipment of like how long it takes to get that piece from that warehouse to your doorstep. So if we're looking at the pick, pack, and ship process, and we use Amazon as our kind of benchmark, we need to be able to do same day standard. So after we establish a same day standard for the Air Force, next up is getting the NGDS to move as quickly as possible. So to do that, I looked at FedEx. And FedEx, when they do, a 1 day, 2 day, and 3 day delivery, but when I started to go through and do the research on, what they could actually provide, generally it came down to 2 business days. So while NGDS currently takes 4 days to deliver our stuff, the absolute fastest that FedEx could probably do it was 2 days. So I recorded all of that, and I took the price tag that would have cost us. But combining all of that together, when you look at those 700 MICAPs, I'm sorry, the 742 MICAPs that I looked at, we lost about 3,568 MICAP days across just those three bases. Wow. So that 742 is 3,568 MICAP days. And if we could speed up our MICAP processing to that same day, in-house processing and then that 2-day shipment, we could have saved about 2,182 MICAP days, which is awesome. But the really important part of all of this is that when you do the math on what a day means to flying hours, that means we could have generated an additional 662 additional flying hours. And when you consider the fact that most F-16s only fly about 150 to 250 hours per year, that basically is the equivalent of an additional 3 F-16s at these 3 bases, so like 1 each. And the price tag that's attached to that is about $300,000.
Wow. Can't buy an F-16 for that, at least not in this country.
No. But we can get the equivalent of it for about $300K, which was awesome.
Wow. And so I'm reminded of General Goldfein, the former chief of staff's words, to Congress. It was, we need, was it 386 flying squadrons, 386 flying squadrons. So that means more planes. And we're not necessarily going to actually go buy those planes. We're going to have to figure out a way to make the planes that we have work and last longer. Right. So I think that addresses that pretty directly.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's this great MITRE study that talks about, increasing the value of what you have right now gives you a greater net effect, which is obviously pretty straightforward. But if you have 10 F-16s and you can only launch 6 of those, well, then you only have the net warfighting equivalent of 6 F-16s. But if you can increase that to 8 by, now you have 8 warfighting F-16s. When the equivalent, if you're just buying more jets rather than sustaining the ones that you currently have, you have to buy 2 extra ones. So 12 F-16s to generate 8. Which instead, if we can use better processing, then we can instead keep 10 F-16s and still generate 8 aircraft.
Yeah.
So Garrett, I want to hear what you have to say in your thoughts. We talked a lot about Amazon, talked a lot about, Air Force logistics, and you were there, since day one of MICAP Prime. How do you see this evolution and view this research?
Yeah, thanks for bringing me in, Matt. Mic check. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you. Beautiful voice, and you look great in your uniform today.
All right, sweet. Yeah, I think this is the 8th time I've worn my uniform in a long time. That's good. Yeah, so I think it's great. The 2 years ago this month, I was preparing to graduate EWE, and at the time, even before graduating EWE, we were getting traction that the A4 was going to build something like what Tesseract exists today. The vision was always that if there were ideas like MICAP Prime, or ideas like an URSUS, and they were just sort of sitting in the minds of an airman, and they needed the resources to make it happen, that an entity like a Tesseract could make it happen, that we've spent that time getting things off the ground with pathfinders like MICAP Prime, and we're sort of showing the enterprise that tweaking and transforming is worth it, and it sort of puts us closer to moving the needle in the direction that we want to move it. It is it's really cool to see, and its result. It's not just conceptual. The tie back to Amazon was really fun. I think some of the most fun I'll ever have in my career was sitting in the basement of the Pentagon with Chip, just getting lunch, and we were talking about his report, and it's sort of just clicking. And I've spent a handful of years in the Air Force doing logistics, but that year that I spent at Amazon really changed a lot of things for me and opened my eyes to seeing things, maybe some of the same things in a different way, especially when it came to how we operate our supply chain. And he showed me his big gonculated Excel spreadsheet of, if we just move parts a little faster, here are all the jets that we could turn. And I thought, man, I can't calculate any of the numbers you just did, but it makes so much sense. I almost don't need to see the numbers, because because it's just something that we all know, right? For any LRO or supply troop or transportation troop, it's our hands on boxes, pushing pallets, throwing nets. It's all that stuff that usually gets forgotten in what gets termed a supply chain. But when with Chip's data and now Vince's data, it just shows, I think, something that we've all felt and never just really had a vehicle to make it happen with. And that vehicle, I think, is this Pathfinder called MICAP Prime. The notion that the pick, pack, and ship process, if we were just a little bit more deliberate in tightening our performance windows, then we could deliver Amazon like results. And that it's not an apples to apples comparison by any means. Amazon makes same day shipping, next day shipping, 2-day shipping on millions of items by the billions each year, billions of transactions. They do that at capacity on on a 1 million person strong workforce and on hundreds of thousands of robots and hundreds of thousands of more scanners. There's a lot of automation and technology, and there's a lot of data scientists crunching high level algorithms that push their supply chain in a way that it can be responsive to the point that when you click on your phone, buy now, within seconds, minutes, or hours, that item is on its way to you. In the Air Force, we're a little different. We don't have the same growth mindset. In fact, we're in the opposite mindset in a lot of ways. Our budgets are flatlining or shrinking. Very different than Amazon, who can sort of devote billions more each year to things like R&D, workforce, and automation. So how could we drive some of the same effects without maybe the same technology? What was a big deal? And it came down to, pull the part off the shelf quicker, put it in a box faster, and give it to a FedEx, UPS, USPS, or Amazon truck driver faster, because they have a network that is built for peak. I think it was one of the things that I never even realized until I got to Amazon, but that amazing shipping network that we all take advantage of on a daily basis throughout the year is built for peak capacity in the months of October, November, and December, leading right up to Christmas. That's where e-commerce buys go big, right? Because Aunt X wants to buy a gift for nephew Y across the country. And Amazon has, along with every other e-tailer, has made that really easy to do. But as it turns out, in those months, when the system is just at peak performance, in the off months, we get the same level of benefit, even if they're not the same level of capacity. So I thought it was really cool that at Chip and in Vince's research, we're leveraging things like NGDS, which is great cost savings and value in expedited shipping. And it's beyond our intuition, because like we all know, when we want to overnight something and we bring it to FedEx ourselves, that can cost a lot of money, sort of item by item. But when you look at that contract that Transcom has with all of these providers, turns out it's what Chris said earlier, right? For pennies on the dollar more, we can buy back readiness by selecting overnight, next day, or 2-day shipping instead of treating it like a personal retail account where it's like, yep, I will wait a week for this to get to so-and-so. So there's all kinds of things in there that just make this really fun to do and to see. And it's actually on, it's on Chris and the army that he's building now to make this just the way we do business, as opposed to some crazy new idea.
Yeah. So I'm actually curious. So I know in the I guess let's say OCONUS in NGDS, there's something like 8 levels of service. Vince, in your research, what did you find? How many levels of service do we have for OCONUS?
Yeah, so actually that's one of my big recommendations for this. So the next generation delivery service from CONUS to OCONUS, there's only one level of service. So it doesn't matter if something's just standard off of the shelf and no real priority to it, or if it's an aircraft MICAP that's holding an aircraft down. All of that just goes this single one level of service for NGDS. And like I said, on average, it's like 4 days of shipment. So normally we exceed our own Air Force like unofficial 7-day standards. But if we can have Transcom open up a new contract line with NGDS that allows for 2-day shipping, then we can still utilize this new higher level of service for all of those MICAP type of items that we need to get there like as soon as possible. And we can still use that 4-day next generation delivery service to get that standard stuff there, still pretty expedited.
What mechanisms do we need to set in place to ensure that that we meet those levels of service?
Well, so this one's interesting, right? Because there still needs to be a lot of study into the Air Force processes for this, because every base does it slightly different, because it's not necessarily standardized in uniform. But I think that there's a potential for an advantage there, because every base is slightly different, and every base's challenge is slightly different. We don't get to kind of do a cookie cutter fulfillment center, that Amazon can do. And then Amazon can do a lot of, in-house, a lot of in-house rebuilding and infrastructure development that we can't necessarily do at the same pace. And so instead of trying to dictate to the each base what they need to do, instead, if we turned around and made a goal and had, IMSC put out this goal that says, hey, same day pick, pack, and ship. And, Chip is on point when he starts talking about timing the critical pull, because we do need to time and measure each of these individual steps. But truly what we really care about is getting the part out same day. So that's our North Star metric when it comes to pick, pack, and ship. Was this part pulled up, picked off the shelf, packed, and then ready to hand to the commercial carrier so that they can get on its travel. So that's the one that I think IMSC should truly care about, and then let each base do whatever they need to do to try to get to that. And I think that they can kind of come up with a couple of rewards that in turn incentivize this. Come up with some best TMO in the Air Force, best M flight, D flight in the Air Force type of stuff, to incentivize these squadrons to come up with new innovative solutions for their own personal challenges.
Yeah, I'll throw in on that. To metrics, we as separate communities inside the logistics larger community, we have some amazing TMO troops out there that they're extremely efficient with given the constraints that they have, right? And that's downrange in dusty areas, sort of austere environment, or back at like Chris's former place of work, right? What is it, Chris? The Superport? Is that what you guys call it?
It's called the Superport. Emphasis.
The Superport. That's right. And Travis is America's first choice, and the McGuire one is, what is that? That's the aerial port of choice. They're all great. TMO troops, transportation troops. These boxes do not sit for long. But I think that to the point of setting standards, I think in the TMO community, it's just known everywhere you go, 24-hour evacuation. You shouldn't be sitting on anything more than 24 hours. But 24 hours for a box that arrives at 2 p.m. On a Monday, 24 hours means I have till 1:59 the next day to move it. If instead that rule or that community standard was more like get it out today, if it's a 1A MICAP, all the other stuff can go 24 hours. That's how you get that prime effect. And I remember Amazon did this for the last 15 years really well, which was, if you clicked the Prime button, you were getting it in 2 days. And if it wasn't Prime, then it got there in a week. And that was Amazon's way of sort of encouraging growth and getting subscribers to say, yeah, I want that sort of all you can eat shipping. But it doesn't happen without making it a standard to achieve. And it's worth sort of repeating here that 15 years ago when they were pitching Amazon Prime, the highest levels of Amazon leaders told Jeff Bezos this was going to bankrupt the company. We should absolutely not do this. This is one that the craziness of it might work. And if it does, we might be successful, but it's very likely not going to work and just going to hurt us. And his hunch was always, if we do this, the strategic effects will change the game and will change the equations by which we determine what is good and what is valuable. I think that's what we can sort of see here in sort of just a small example in the Air Force, which is if we can change some of our rules and our supply troops, our TMO troops, and our transporters can tweak a little bit of it, it's like, yep, this might be different. It might seem expensive, but the strategic effect that it can have, right, that prime effect, could end up very well being worth it. And that's what I think that's what's going to drive a good supervisor to say something like, every hour we're looking for 1A MICAPs, in this sea of boxes on our floor. And every hour we're going to pick them out and move them to the new front of the line instead of just one big batch by the end of the day, or one big batch. I'll do half of it today, half of it tomorrow morning. And in some cases that's still all 24 hours, but it's that, I don't want to call it the tyranny of low standards, but that the high standard is what's going to drive that strategic result.
Yeah.
Well, and there's that piece of understanding your strategic place in all of this too. If we can translate to our fantastic supply and TMO troops that, hey, one less day means a sortie happens, that's awesome. And when looking at all of my data and stuff, of the 742 MICAPs that I reviewed for this, 129 of those went out same day. So this is entirely possible for us to do. I think it just takes supply discipline, and it takes that process discipline to make sure that we pull that part as soon as an order comes in, and then TMO understands that they gotta push it as fast as possible.
Yeah, I think that's what I've heard Vince and Chip talk about so well. The hero work that happens and that we prove every day is possible. Why don't we make that the standard for our most important requisitions in the supply chain? I think that's what we're really sort of trying to get to here. And, I'm sort of preaching to the choir with Chris, because Chris is the guy who's going to get tasked with the job of staffing the interim change guidance and ultimately getting those changes to the paragraphs in the various AFIs, AFMANs, TTPs, so on and so forth. But you're right, that supply discipline, it's being disciplined and knowing what to be disciplined about, because it's all a trade-off. For every 1A MICAP that we move to the front of the line, we're cutting potentially hundreds of other requisitions. But that's us knowing what deserves to be at the front and what deserves to sort of wait.
Yeah.
All TP1 is not created equal, is something that I think we have to sort of hold ourselves accountable to, right? Transportation priority 1 at the top of the list. It should be broken down and is broken down into smaller subcategories. And that's just us, being extra accountable to it.
Yeah. It kind of struck me today. I've been trying to explain, what I'm doing with work to family and friends. And somebody asked me, well, what does a MICAP really matter? Like, is it that important? And it hit me today when I was coming over here, right? So I was looking for my headphones and my car keys. And my wife had taken the main set of car keys. And so I was left with the spares. And I was dashing around the house trying to find the spares, right? So I had a working car, except for one thing, right? I needed one thing in order to go. And so I was sweating a little bit, maybe yelled at the dog a little bit to get out of the way. But it was so important for me to have that one little thing, and it hit me, man. That's a MICAP, right? My headphones are not MICAP. I don't need those. They'd be great, but don't need them. But that car key is the most important thing. So for our maintainers on the line, that MICAP is the most important thing to get that jet up off the ground. And I think what we can do here is really get after it. I think Vince, what you're working on and what you've worked on is really kind of getting there. So what do you think that kind of the next steps are to get more speed for MICAPs from CONUS to OCONUS, and I imagine back too, right?
Well, so yeah, a big piece of that is that process discipline that we were kind of just talking about, is instituting process discipline from within our own piece, within our own house, to make sure that we pick, pack, and ship those MICAPs as quickly as possible, but then working with Transcom to set up that new level of NGDS service. Because if we can get these parts out within 2 days, from CONUS to OCONUS within 2 days, then we can literally save thousands of MICAP days, which in turn generates hundreds of sorties. And again, I take it back to that strategic piece of, our enemies are looking at us. They are watching us every single day. And if we can generate more sorties, if we can show that we are so ready and so capable, then our enemies aren't even going to try to fight us. And all of that comes back to speeding our processes up and making it so that we can generate as many flying hours as possible.
What are you going to wish you had more time to study and to research? And what do you think that next evolution of research could have been if you had more time there at ASAMs?
Well, so I think that there's a lot of ways that this can go. One thing that we need to keep looking at this. We need to keep expanding it. I did a ton of work into one specific weapon system, that F-16. So I think we need to look at other weapon systems to make sure that we can still get this same effect from other weapon systems too. We need to expand this to more bases and more regions, because I picked 3 bases for this because I wanted to make sure that we wouldn't just get a one-off fluke from one base versus another base. And yep, sure enough, we can generate additional flying hours from any base that we look at. The savings are everywhere to be had. We just have to work on it. But if we continue to expand this and continue to do more weapon systems and more bases, then we're going to keep building that argument for why this is such an important thing to do. And beyond that, so one of the other things, kind of a offshoot tangent that I would kind of recommend somebody start to study, is enterprise resource planning software for logistics. One of the big challenges that I had in all of this is that we don't have one system that tracks it all. We don't have one system that combines the flying demand with the demand for parts at the location, the parts ordering, the transportation, the tracking of the transportation. There's no one system that combines all of that together. So in order to generate like the story for every single one of those MICAPs, I had to go to 3 separate systems. And in those 3 separate systems, there's no guarantee that they're all going to link up. There's no unifying or unique identifier that connects one order from ILSS, the supply system, to CMOS or IGC, the transportation system. And so I lost like over 500 pieces of data through this process, simply because we just don't have a system that combines it all together. And so that bad data plagues us every single day. And then we don't have a great way of measuring what things we need to order in the Air Force to meet future demand requirements, all because we don't have this ERP software. Now, and it's super important. We really lack supply chain visibility in the Air Force. And we knew that this was a problem back in like the 2000s, right? So that's why we actually tried to solve this problem by getting a software system called ECSS. And I'm sure Garrett's off somewhere laughing, as the ECSS is notorious as a gigantic kind of dumpster fire that we lost, or we spent about $1 billion in the Air Force and got nothing for it. But it wasn't because our systems are too difficult or our processes are too complex or what we do is just so dynamic and so unique. It's just not it. The fact is we failed that because of poor acquisitions processes with in-house. We failed ourselves basically. But we needed this stuff back in the 2000s, and it's now 2021 and we still don't have it. And we desperately need this stuff. If we're going to meet these goals, if we're going to be as efficient and try to someday be as have that same type of performance as Amazon and FedEx, then we need ERP software. So my recommendation for another piece of study, if somebody has the time to look at this, would be that they take a look at what ERP software we could use in the Air Force and what that would get structured to look like, so that we can stop having tons of different software systems that don't talk to each other and connect. We can have one system that helps us modify and run our day-to-day operations and connect that downrange demand of a flying operation to the acquisitions and sustainment processes within the Air Force and the DoD.
Garrett, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Vince is 100% right. I like the way he put it. Supply chain is supply chain. You take a lot of our NCOs, our airmen, our senior NCOs, our young officers, and they're immediately marketable at companies like FedEx or UPS or Amazon because of the experience we give them and the experience they earn on active duty. Just learning the IT system, between the two cultures is a process, but it's not difficult. It's all translates back to I'm picking up a box and moving it from a shelf to a truck, from a truck to a plane to a truck to a doorstep. the need for software was definitely something that we highlighted in that initial research paper for Tesseract. I mean, that was the right hook, left hook was if you had a team of subject matter experts who can identify constraints in a manual process and iron them out using something like theory of constraints, that fourth step in that management philosophy is elevate. How do you elevate your constraint? And this day and age, there's a great quote: "Software is eating the world." That was almost 10 years ago. That quote was uttered, and in many ways, our culture is eating our ability to onboard legitimate software into the Air Force. So in some sense, the targets are changing because the years that it takes us to deliver enterprise software are not keeping pace with the latest advances in let's say commercial software development. So I think there's a time where 15 years ago we set out to buy a bunch of ERP, which enterprise resource planning, is that right? And it plugs into all it is that we do, and it does all the planning and the accounting and the financials and the ITV. And these days, when in a mobile world, there's a lot of it that's like, nope, you can custom software, which is different than enterprise. You can custom microservices, which feed into a larger system in the back end. But that, you pick up your phone, the 50 to 60 to 100 apps that you use, in a lot of cases, are not ERP. They're custom 1, 2, or 3 very specific tasks. And they all plug into a big architecture, data architecture grid in the background, and that could feed an ERP. So there's just new software developments. A lot of this is stuff that I imagine I'm only 1 inch deep into understanding, but that 1 inch was a lifetime worth of knowledge that I wasn't able to talk about before I sort of got to go see it at an Amazon. Software is still eating the world. We still need some better software to help our airmen on the front line who are scanning boxes and pushing them out the door, to the back end where our analysts and our scientists have to make big strategic level decisions once you've sort of bottled up all the info from across. But it's great. Look at that. To even prove if we should be sending packages faster, look at it. It took a field grade officer a full year of research and manually, painstakingly pulling data out of various systems and combing through them. I imagine, Vince, line by line, hours and hours and hours of tedious work. Fair?
Yeah, Garrett, you absolutely hit it. I mean, I'm talking weeks, literally weeks of forensics data or forensics effect that I had to do, pulling 1,600 plus MICAPs and going line by line, the supply data, and then taking the supply data over to IGC or CMOS, and then inputting the NSN manually so that I can pull up hopefully the data for transportation right there. And, if I got lucky, then there was only that one NSN order within the time window. And so I could just use, hey, all right, here's the transportation data. And now let me take this and manually move it over to plug it in. And now, luckily, now I'll have the complete picture of this MICAP story. And now let me do that 1,686 more times. I got to tell you, it was excruciating.
And that was if you were lucky. What if you weren't lucky? When you look at the data.
Unlucky. Yeah, so unlucky means I take the NSN from ILSS, the supply system that basically says, hey, this is a MICAP order. I go over, I plug it into IGC or CMOS, and I could get 900 returns. And now I have to go line by line of the returns because there's no unique identifier for each order, right? I literally just had the NSN. And so maybe one of those pieces was the MICAP order, and all of the others were just standard orders. And so I had to go line by line through every single one of those orders to find the ones that meet my date range requirement. And maybe a CMOS and IGC have it labeled as TP1, maybe it doesn't. The fact is that, bad data in means bad data out. If somebody didn't input the data, because there's dudes and dudettes who are doing this manually. If they didn't input it the right way, well, then that was just all lost data. And that's literally, I lost 34% of the 1,600 plus MICAPs that I looked at, 34% of it was just bad data.
Brilliant. Vince, to wrap this conversation up, I have one last question.
Sure.
Is SpaceX rocket cargo going to put you out of business?
The pessimistic view or the optimistic view?
Oh, well, yes.
So my pessimistic view is no, right? So when you start talking about the infrastructure requirement for SpaceX type of stuff, holy crap, you're talking about needing launch pads, landing pads, and all sorts of other delivery issues. And so maybe that last mile logistics is where we start getting into, because instead of C5s and C17s, we replace, with rocket cargo type of stuff. And maybe it gets there a little bit faster, but the complex loading scenarios that you start talking about, where how do you even get things into a rocket and stable so that it can get launched over, that loading requirement is potentially even greater than your loading of a C5 and C17. When you look at that holistic timeline to get something from one hub to another hub, not even talking about the spokes, the timeline may still be greater. Now, all right, if we want to talk about my optimistic view, maybe they acknowledge that those are challenges, and maybe in the future there is some way that that rocket can like drop something as it's still flying, and maybe there's like little shootouts that the cargo gets to get dropped off as if it was being parachuted off of the back of a C-17. Maybe they figure out how to do something like that, and they just completely do an end run around the whole hub and spoke concept. If that happens, awesome. I would love to go out of a job for something like that. But right now, I just don't see it yet. Maybe that's just because I'm not visionary enough. I don't know.
Garrett, what do you think? I know you're an Elon Musk fan.
Oh yeah, man. I think everything Vince said just shows you like look at that's an Air Force logistician talking about the things that aren't sexy and very few people are sort of equipped to think about until it needs to happen. And I consider myself lucky to be invited to professional conferences and or booze fest, floating rivers, getting to hear a lot of this good stuff. I don't know. I think part of me more so looks at it as all the stuff that we sort of see now. A lot of it was unexpected. It sort of happened out of nowhere. It was a random confluence or convergence of other sort of independent events that make it just the way the world is. That the whole SpaceX, you put a MICAP in a rocket and it's 30 minutes from, New Jersey to Shanghai because that's where you need it. That's cool. It seems to me though that we would be using rockets for something other than MICAPs by then. But I don't know. I would love to actually, let's do a pod on that, like a crazy future fourth industrial revolution pod and get some people who are way smarter than us to talk about that tech stuff. Like I can see DZ, Mike going crazy on that. Matt, what do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I'm just picturing a like salty old port dog loading up a Starship rocket, right? And like trying to figure out the like load planning for that. Like, well, which way are you going to come in? Nose first, tail, where are you going to do the flip? I got to know so I can chain it down, right? And then just
they're not letting port dogs next to a rocket.
That'd be awesome. Way. That'd be awesome. It has some dents, but it'd be awesome.
Thank you again for listening to Tesseract Podcast. Make sure you follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and connect with us on LinkedIn. Any references to trademarked, copyrighted, or protected products or services such as books, movies, or businesses are used here for the limited purpose of education and professional development of Air Force Airmen. If you have any questions, please contact us at www.tesseract.af.mil.